So right now we have a panel discussion on navigating the cyber threat terrain, unveiling innovative approaches to cyber risk scoring. First and foremost, please put your hands together and welcome our moderator for the panel, Waqas Haider, CISO, HBL Microfinance Bank. Please put your hands together and welcome Waqas Haider. We also have our panelists here today. Please put your hands together once again and welcome Beenu Arora, co-founder and CEO, Cyber. Azhar Zahiruddin, Director of Data Protection, Group DPO, Shalub Group. Ankit Satsangi, Director, BIA Group. And finally, we have Suhaila Hareb, ISR Auditor, Dubai Electronic Security Center. Everybody, please put your hands together and welcome our panelists and our moderator on stage. Over to you. And welcome, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I hope you're enjoying the sessions. The first keynote speech and the rest. This is the first panel, and we're going to dive into the world of cybersecurity. Threat landscape is growing and becoming complex day by day. There are so many things happening, and with the AI and ML and all sorts of new, technologies coming in, I think it's becoming more and more complex for the defenders out there who are actually coming up with new solutions, new products, and it's actually, seeming like a wild goose chase. So the cyber threat actors, they are also utilizing the new technologies, and the defenders, they're also trying to, scale up their technologies and their, defense systems accordingly. So today we're discussing this very much needed topic, and I have with my panelists with me here, distinguished guests. Beenu, starting with you, please share about yourself and a little brief about your profile, and then one has to give a brief introduction about what they've been doing and how they are adding value to the cybersecurity. Yeah.
Thank you, Waqas, and thank you so much for giving us the opportunity. So I am Beenu, one of the co-founders and CEO at Cyber. Been running the company for over 4.5 years now, but previously was part of the CISO community back in the good old days. But I used to work for companies like Google, BHP Billiton, and at PwC was a director of consulting. I'm a trained software engineer. That's what I've been doing for most of my life, and super excited to be here sharing my experiences as well as thoughts on the emerging threat landscape and how Cyber as an organization is tackling the emerging or the Gen 3 cybercrime activities globally. So again, thanks for having us today. Really, really excited about that.
Can everyone hear me? Right, great. Well, thank you everyone for having me here today. I am Azhar Zahiruddin. I'm really humbled to be a part of this panel with esteemed guests who has so much great knowledge up here. I come from a background of cybersecurity consulting and data privacy consulting as well. I have, my background has a lot been focused on developing privacy programs, data protection programs, and even conducting investigations for Fortune 500 organizations. Some of the investigations, some may have seen in the news about a large social media company out in the US. Now I'm in the Middle East for the past 3 years as part of consulting as well. And I have joined Shalhoub Group now about a little north of a year. And I operate as a data protection officer. So I look at data protection governance, AI governance, and other regulatory requirements dealing with digital ethics. So thank you for having me.
Hi, my name is Ankit. I am a director for BIA Group. I have worn different hats through the career. Started as consulting and advisory mostly. Majority of the career has been that, and then been with some law enforcement agencies. Now at BIA as a director, primary skill sets, offensive security and intelligence, and I think that's the sum of it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Suhaila Hareb. I work at Dubai Electronic Security Center as an Information Security Regulation Auditor, which is ISR. I've been auditing Dubai government entities and semi-government entities for around 8 years. So ISR is focusing on information security. It has multiple domains. It encompasses main controls and sub-controls. It is actually closely aligned with ISO 27. I'm looking forward to a fruitful discussion discussing information security or cybersecurity risk scoring methodologies.
Thank you so much, Suhaila. Thank you, Beenu, Ankit, and Azhar. So I forgot to introduce myself. So my name is Waqas Haider, as you know, it's written there. I am CISO for a bank, and I've worked in almost all areas of information security, cybersecurity, including application security and database, network infra, and the core GRC. So this challenge of today, as I was mentioning, the cyber threats are growing. And when cyber threat landscape is growing, it's a unique challenge for every organization, because every organization has its own risk profile by virtue of the type of people, process, technology they have implemented. So working with different organizations, I know that for sure no single organization has, a different or I would say a common profile with any other organization. So it is because of the underlying design of the organization. And starting with this, I would ask Azhar, I'd ask you, what keeps you awake at night when you think about the cyber threats there and the need for protecting the data of the stakeholders?
Yeah, no, that's a very profound question, because there's so many things that keep me up at night when it comes to the digital age. We live in a time where in digital transformation, there's so much innovation happening on the defensive side of security, but also we see these innovations happening on the offensive side of security. There are things like polymorphic malware, where it's an AI algorithmic malware that just keeps changing every time it exploits a vulnerability. There is sophisticated social engineering techniques out there through AI, generative AI especially. With all these things and advancements happening, for me, one thing that remains constant for organizations is, what do you know about yourself? What do you know about your organizations? Threats can always be changing and innovating. Unfortunately, it's going to get tougher and tougher. But how can we prepare for tomorrow? And there's only one way you can really prepare for tomorrow, is really understanding your organization, understanding where your data is residing. How are you using your data? In which capacity is the data being used and shared or transferred outside your jurisdictions? Is it personal data, intellectual property? How are you protecting it? So understanding how you are interfacing with your own crown jewels, your own data, would be the priority. And sometimes, this requires sophisticated processes, technologies, and some organizations may not have feasibility or financial structure to sustain or build that. So thankfully, I'm part of an organization that's very large, and we have been continuously working towards building something for this. And the priority has always been, how well do we know ourselves? And for people out there, it shouldn't be necessarily what's the external threat. How well do we know ourselves? If you don't know that, that should be keeping everyone up at night.
Great insight. And as you rightly mentioned, the data is the core that one needs to protect. So the domain of information security, when it came into being, existence. So since existence inception, it was about, I always tell everyone, information security is securing the information, and information is processed data. When we talk about data, data is what actually, it is the new oil, right? So it's something which actually drives decision making. It drives a lot of things. It drives the business, the value, the revenue. And with this, I would ask you, Ankit, what keeps you awake at night? Is it the threats or the Netflix?
Don't think the last time I had time for Netflix, honestly. But what really keeps me up at night is that one specific person from one specific department. What happens if he clicks on anything that is not supposed to be in his inbox, right? And everything's just going to come boiling down to me. That's really what keeps me up at night, and it's a constant. I keep going back to this formula, which is risk equals likelihood versus impact, right? And if you expand and blow that up, then that's kind of the sum of everything that you're trying to do, and it's just a constant improvement of on that, but also constant innovation in terms of detection and response strategies, and rather not reactive but more proactive, is really what keeps me up at night.
Great. And with this premise that organizations and people who are working in the security, they can't actually have a good sleep. If anyone has seen this image there on the internet, the different styles of sleeping, of executives. So you would see CEO and the CFO, and then you will find the bed is empty for the CISO, because there's he has to be there on call for all sorts of alerts and offenses with the SOC, especially the Security Operations Center. And with that, what strategies I would ask you. What strategies, Beenu, do you think are required to ensure that no one is waking up at night, and there is good information out there, and the teams who can actually respond to threats? Because most of the threat actors actually, they start working when everyone is sleeping, right? Yeah, sure.
So, I mean, being in the CISO chair in the past, and now being an OEM player, I can feel the pain. I mean, the cyber criminals are not stopping. I mean, today, for an example, we are tracking more than 4,000 cyber criminals globally, and these guys are working round the clock. The modus operandi, it keeps changing, keeps on evolving. I mean, it might not surprise you, but there's a big markets out there where people are actively selling zero-day exploits, or selling vulnerabilities, or even selling credentials. These are actively happening all over the world. And there's no one region which is at the epicenter or impacted region at the moment. I think as far as the entire Emirates is being concerned, we've been seeing that the threat actors are actively targeting not just the traditional like manufacturing or utilities organization. I think it's across the board, including the banks, fintech, and so forth. So coming to the question you ask on what kept me awake, or what has my experience been, I think it's just been worrying about that one night I might get a call that we are seeing our data being exfiltrated. It may not surprise you that on every 24 hours, and this is the statistics which is being backed by our own research, every 24 hours there are 3 victims who are being targeted by the ransomware attacks. And many of the times you don't even get to know about it, because people end up either paying the ransom or they just keep the shh. We don't going to talk about that. So the strategies around what you can do about it, I think there's an amazing set of frameworks out there, all the way from ISO, NIST frameworks, and so forth. I think it's in my opinion, in the current era which we are living in, CISOs have been asked to do a lot more with even lesser resources they had in the past. And that's the biggest challenge. The expectations are not changing. We are still being asked to protect the organization. I mean, despite of being a startup, we have a security team with over 10 people, even being a startup, internal security. We see the attacks all day in, day out. I think what the environment, the way it is changing, it's not just having a robust strategies on how you're going to be tackling any incident, or how you're going to manage the data or the application or the infrastructure. It's also about the individuals or the upskilling of the people, not just within cybersecurity teams internal, but across the board. So I'm sure most of you guys over here, you work with engineers, developers, DevOps. I mean, the pace at which the organizations are pushing the management team across all the different departments within the organization, they want to get more things done. and which means they want us to be more agile, more fast-paced, less processes where we can, and then push things out to the end customer. There's a race. And often when you are in a race, you end up sometimes making mistakes, sometimes you miss the processes, sometimes the checks are not done properly, and so forth. And then the repercussions are massive. So again, I think when you look at the entire, especially on the defense and response strategies around, I think it needs to tackle those edge case scenarios, and then being able to deploy the right skilled people with the right set of tools to be able to detect those sophisticated attacks, and then being able to effectively respond to it. And there's a good saying, I think I think somewhere in the US said that it's not about matter of if, it's all about when it comes to cyber security breaches. So we just have to prepare, and exercising, tabletop exercises, doing a cyber crisis simulations, those are essential. I mean, people who, like if you asked me 5 years ago, like people ask like how many times do you actually do cyber crisis simulation? They would say, yeah, we did some of this, we invited some people, we'd sat on a table, we exercise. But hey, come on, I mean, when the breaches happen, the message actually goes all the way at the top of the board, even the external agencies, including the police department and even the investigative agencies. So when you are planning these things out, especially on the response side, you need to take a more holistic approach. That's just some of my thoughts and experiences in this space.
Thank you so much. That's so true about the preparedness that's much needed for the cyber attacks out there. And this is an interesting question that, a lot of organizations are faced with, where the board and the senior management, even external auditors and the regulators ask that, are you safe? One simple line, but, it has so much to answer, so much, and it's very, it's very challenging to sum it up and, answer this question. And most of the times when this question is posed to me, I actually respond that, events and attacks are happening all the time. So even as we speak right now, there are attacks coming up on the firewall, on different, defensive systems of the organization. And they're in millions, right? And that's why the systems are there in place. But the second challenge that the organizations face is that where the management, the board would always ask for, okay, there's so much out there. You have all these systems in place. So are these systems effective? You're asking for new systems and solutions. And when we sum up all the investment and the cost, is it worth it? Because the attack never materialized, So until and unless the attack materializes and, there's a cost quantified and they actually, the fear becomes real, it becomes a reputational loss, financial loss, or any, even the operational loss in terms of the business and revenue you lost just because of the downtime and the trust which was broken. So I think this is where, my next question, Suhaila, to you is that, as a reviewer, you have always been reviewing different postures, and how do you believe organizations are balancing their agility? And when we talk about the security versus agility, as Beenu also mentioned about being agile, so agile, a lot of people in the business side think that it's being fast delivery, but it's rather than a fast delivery, it's an iterative process of improvement, continuous improvement. So how do you think organizations are doing and how they're balancing the act?
Well, first of all, I think they need to prioritize their assets, their critical systems, their critical services, their critical data. So this is when it comes to prioritizing. I think prioritizing is very important. From a cybersecurity government regulator perspective, cyber scoring is very important and crucial for any organization to implement. It is important to evaluate the readiness of an organization to manage cyber risk and security posture. Furthermore, it helps the organization to understand their critical asset status and where to improve. We should always remember that Cyber risk shouldn't be segregated from business risk, as it falls under the responsibility of the business owner to identify business owners to identify their own risk, and not the CISO or the IT department. In general, risk scoring, whether qualitative or quantitative, it is important to identify threats and vulnerabilities, and address a corresponding level for each risk. For example, low, medium, or high, depending on the entities or an organization risk methodology, while of course. And by adding those levels, an entity can prioritize their assets, the critical assets, whether service, systems, or data, and based on that, security measures and controls will be set. There is one other aspect I'd like to highlight is some organizations usually suffer from insufficient resources or misallocate those resources. For those resources not to go to waste, prioritizing assets is a key element for these assets, and it will enable a better utilization and allocation in the future.
Wonderful insight. Suhaila rightly mentioned prioritization is the key message. And
Yes.
that's where the board, the senior management, they have to understand and should be given the insight, because most of the board members and senior management are generally not that techie. They are mostly into business side. So they need this much needed awareness about how prioritization can be done on the technology side for security, and the people side on the security, and of course the processes as well. So generally what happens is that the drive comes from the regulator. A lot of things happen because of regulator push, and there are so many best practices out there. I mean, Beenu just mentioned, talking about so many frameworks coming up and have been existing from long time. ISO 27001 was always there. People looked at it as a certification process and getting stamped that we're doing well, our processes are okay. So that's an award-winning strategy. And then came up with the NIST, the cybersecurity risk framework, and with NIST, people thought that all these 5 capabilities, if we show something which ticks the box, we are okay. But it goes much deeper than that, because I always say the security is not equal to compliance. When you feel that compliance is done, still the cyber threat actors are not sleeping, right? And no matter what your compliance checklist or report say, the threat actors would find their way, because they're exploring, coming up with new zero-day vulnerabilities. They're researching, and they have a lot of time to do that. But they have to be correct one time, and the security teams have to be correct all the time, right? And that's where the next challenge comes. So when we're talking about the tools in place, Ankit, starting with you, I'll ask this question from you. The tools, what do you think? I mean, having all these defensive tools and having GRC tools, testing the security from the application security perspective, that doing the vulnerability assessment PT, is it enough, or is it something, there is something missing in the puzzle? Which piece is missing?
So I'll answer that question. Yeah. Before I answer that question, I'd like to add a couple of points on the previous question, right? In my personal opinion, and everyone's open to probably disagree, is in my personal opinion, agility in security would come when your board is on board with your agenda for security, right? And one of the key challenges that a lot of CISOs, including myself and everybody here probably face, is converting cyber, or rather technology risk, to business risk, right? And that is a continuous process. At sometimes they buy it, and at sometimes they don't, right? And you've always got to be creative on finding new ways to get things approved. That is one. Second, security is never convenient, right? Either you have convenience or you have security, which would result in a lot of resistance from major departments and C-levels. And when C-levels get involved, you don't have two ways about it. right? So I think that's another constant loop of finding new ways of introducing, or rather demonstrating what you're trying to achieve by showing them what they achieve out of it as a business function. Third would be, because security is never convenient, to highlight the fact that it is not convenient and for a good reason. That comes down to awareness and introducing a culture, right? And that's a constant process as well. So just a couple of things that I wanted to highlight. Now, coming back to the tool sets, the red and the blue, I don't think I will mention any tools, but I'll keep it very generic. This part of the world, at least the Middle East, I don't think, how many organizations, and I could see, I would ask for a raise of hands, how many organizations actually conduct tabletops, right? How many organizations actually conduct physical security assessments, right? Because I could social engineer my way into an organization, right? Have an RJ45, just give me an IP and that's it, right? And a lot of people don't quite understand the severity of that until they make the headlines and you know, things have already blown up. So no, it is not enough. There's a lot of creative thinking that is involved in security, and I would call it a technical, creative function rather than just calling it technical, because you can't rely on the tool sets that are available to you today, than bank on certain processes that would enable you to achieve certain functions that tool sets wouldn't.
Great insight. Azhar, what's your take on the tools we're having today, and you know, are they enough for the security teams to combat the threats, or I mean, there's something left in the puzzle, the piece which has to be, you know, ensured that this comes in and it will give more assurance?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So, you know, I will offer a similar perspective to our panelists here. You know, in my role, when I look at the privacy and the data protection and the usage of it, and what kind of technology we use to optimize our processes, the first thing always goes back to, you know, do we know our processes? So before you even get to the tools itself on the defensive side of things, there has to be a level of manual effort that put in this, so you understand how you're using your data and what kind of processes and operations are in place for your organization. And once you have a full understanding of it, that's your people, that's your process, that's when you can finally optimize it effectively. It's no point for an organization to start using different tools and applications and all these sophisticated technologies when you don't get the right effect out of it. You know, it will be very easy for Ankit to social engineer himself to a facility. I don't want him to come to a Shalhoub group now. But, you know, and that goes back to having that right awareness in place. So along with that understanding of processes, there needs to be a constant training awareness in place for organizations to keep, you know, honing in on the importance of security threats and criticalities of your systems that you're using, and understanding the processes that organizations are taking based on their operations. Then optimization and tools can be effectively used.
Suhaila, my question to you is about, as the panelists mentioned, about tools. So basically, tools are not the end; they're the means to an end, right? And the technology and the tools, there will be, you know, improvement in tools and technology, but at the same time, we see the threat landscape is changing, right? And something new will come up. So the tools should be adaptive, and, you know, the technology should be adaptive. It should be kind of an enabler for you to help see the future and to respond to the future. What's your take on it?
So what we see from cybersecurity industry for securing assets, for securing infrastructure, is implementing the principles of zero trust. Zero trust will add multiple layers of security to the infrastructure, to securing assets, so on. There is also one important aspect I need to address, which is about the supply chain management. This will address any related risk to the third party. It will adhering the related risk parties to the obligation, to the standards, to the newest regulations. Also, integrating various data from multiple sources will create a holistic view of any risk and of any future threats as well. As an auditor, I always advise organization to conduct periodic tests or to propose interactive workshops with employees so they can understand what are risks, what are their critical assets, how to handle all the risk, and understand it, to be engaged mainly, and to make sure as well that the controls are implemented. One other thing that people nowadays are keen to use AI technologies, but there are many advantages, of course, of using AI, such as collecting data. It will help in decision making and so on. But what about disadvantage? People don't keen to discuss the disadvantage of using AI. So we need to address those risks in order to avoid them. For example, AI tend to be as a target for cyber attacks. It can be also manipulate or use personal information data regarding to personal people, or it will affect also the PII risk as well. Also, I advise the organization to always look for and search for any recent standards, recent application, and comply with them as well.
Right. So, hello. So yeah. So with this, I would ask another question from you. The question is about when you talk about the AI adoption, and especially with, I mean, there was a lovely presentation before from Irene, and it was about, how people are actually, putting their information out there, not realizing, and you're talking about the awareness part as well.
Yeah.
Like in organization developers, they put the code to get, more structured code response and, to save the time. And there were news from Samsung that actually, had a policy on its, developers not to publish code out there. And that happened actually. There was an incident. And similar incidents are happening in the industry, where organizations are now coming up with policies specifically with regards to the generative AI. And as you said about the awareness piece, where people are still struggling to make sure that their teams are not clicking on the email, and this thing where the AI comes in, how do you think the policy matters going on with are the management supportive of the policy to restrict AI, such as ChatGPT in the in organizations, and how people are responding from the creative side, where people want to actually come up with new product services and utilize it? So they are growing frustrations between the two sides, the security and the business. What's your take on that? What's your view? How do you see these things happening?
So an organization, they should always have a holistic view of any imposed risk on them or on their employees. So they need to update cyber risk scoring methodologies. They have to keep it updated, because traditional risk cyber scoring methodologies, organizations that don't keep updated, let's just say, are more prone to cyber threats and vulnerabilities. They usually use, they have traditional approach. They usually use certain rules or specific criteria for re-evaluating risk. They usually follow a manual approach with limited data sources, and they do not have that, like, a holistic view of the data. So these risks will impact the risk and the assets as well. And however, these mentioned challenges will not contribute in enhancing the automated risk management in a real-time data using data analysis. It would not support a proactive risk assessment and assessing these risks in a timely manner as well. So my point of view is keeping update with latest trends, latest methodologies, and so on.
I think that's a great way to respond to the emerging threats, as you rightly mentioned. So when we talk about the emerging threats, we start with the threat landscape, and now we have actually, come, far into the conversation where we're talking about, okay, so there's a changing landscape, and we know that there are internal deficiencies. There'll be never perfect people, process, technology, and there is a need to educate people. And with this, we have that all the threats and the risks should be quantified. Even Ankit talked about, the formula which is used where we talk about likelihood and impact. So it means that quantification of risk is really important. The threat is really important. So if an organization is quantifying the threats and labeling it, saying that, okay, this is critical, this is high, this is medium, and this is low, I think, or whatever the criteria they use to, rank or rate or score the risk or threat, that actually helps to prioritize resources, because resources are not, unlimited. They are not infinite. They're finite. And with this, I'll ask you, Beenu, how important is risk scoring, cyber risk scoring, and how it adds value to the organization? Because we've already talked about, and I think we already know what's the value out there. But how do you think that, with an adaptive cyber risk scoring system, organizations can, make a difference in their response to threats?
I think anyone who is in the room, especially who has played a CISO role or playing a CISO role or CI role, we have been dealing with this whole prioritization, the scoring thing for more than a decade, probably a couple of decades. This is nothing new about it. For people who have been dealing with incidents or incident managers or security operations centers, P0, P1, P2s, this is like a nomenclature we live with every day. So the question becomes like, why is risk scoring becoming a lot more relevant or maybe popular in the current era? That's what I would really like to emphasize upon. If you look at, there's a bunch of technologies which is out there who are proactively or reactively collecting information and then assigning a certain score or threat level, which helps the operations team to prioritize their efforts on. As a concept, it's beautiful. It's definitely beautiful, because as you rightly mentioned, we have finite resources. We want to focus on where we can get the biggest bang of the buck. What are the key priorities? That's amazing. It's not about whether the concept is good or bad. It's all about how well you implement it. That's where the challenges are, in my humble opinion. So let's start with the first thing, the risk scoring. I think, in my opinion, there's a lot of Q&A needs to happen on the standardization on how you score a particular threat or a risk in the organization. More importantly, there are many examples in the market today which are giving certain risk scores which are black box in nature. They don't even tell you why is that score or how this score is being derived. So when you are on the buy side of these solutions, one of the questions which I always ask my vendors or my OEM in the past is, that's great. You're telling me, I've got 1,000 out of 1,200. Maybe it's a good or bad, but tell me, how did you derive to that number? That is what I think the buyer should be asking it. How can we be more open and communicative about this entire methodology when you're coming with this risk scoring? But let's say, for the sake of conversation, that the OEM and the buyer both have agreed upon, hey, this is how we're going to do scoring. There's a transparency over there. And we all love transparency, I can assume here. But then think about that. In the last 3.5 years, let's say last 1,000 days, can anybody guess how many companies have been reportedly breached globally? Any rough count? If anybody wants to make a guess, 100,000. How many companies do you think have been breached in the last 1,000 days? Which is being reported. I'm not even asking about people who are just paying up the ransom and just quietly sitting there. Any rough guesses? So the numbers which we are tracking at the moment as an OEM, it's more than 50,000. So 50,000 companies, over 50,000 companies globally have been breached in the last 1,000 days. So let's go, I'm an analyst, right? I like to go deep dive into those whole numbers. So on an average, there's like 50 companies are being breached on a daily basis. What is the likelihood that every 50 company which is breached on a daily basis had no security control, had no antiviruses, had no defense in depth mindset, or had no cyber kill chain methodology? Actually, the fact is, many of the companies which have been breached, many of them actually were very mature. In fact, they actually had a very robust security scoring implementation across the entire SOC, their GRC, even at the strategy level, but yet it is happening. So that comes to a second point. While you may have a transparency on how you're doing the scoring, it's also important, are you missing the data points which can create skewness on how you're doing the quantification? So that the concept around is not just about whether your methodology is good or bad, but also do you have the complete data to be able to come to a quantified scoring which can help you prioritize your resources. That's the second challenge which we have seen. So when it comes to, if you are on the buy side or on the sell side of security solutions, I think fundamentally you should be looking at what is the depth and the width of your data collections capability. And then the second question is, how well are you adaptive in terms of changing the scoring methodologies pertaining to my organization? So for scoring mechanism for a bank and for a utility company is very different. The entire risk management frameworks are very different. Even the material risks are different. I don't think banking industry, maybe things have changed in the last 5 years since I've actually jumped from the buy side to a sell side. I think the banking industry never had a material risk where somebody can die or health and safety concern, whereas utilities, the worst case scenario is on health and safety. So you cannot have the same methodology applicable to all different industries. So the entire scoring as a model, it needs to be co-created with the customer. But then the implementation is more important, how well your data collection capabilities are good enough, how you are prioritizing your scoring, frameworks around it. And then more importantly, how do you cut down the noise? And that's where ML and AI can be of huge play. I definitely believe AI has an evil side as well. But just like any other technology, 15 years ago when the cloud was booming, people had questions about it, why we are sending data to cloud and everything. And people today are skeptic about AI. Why should I send my data to, companies like OpenAI and others? But at the end of the day, customers are going to be demanding more out of you, whether you like it or not. So the embracing is the only way. And you do it in a fashion which is a lot more transparent on how you are communicating the data or sharing the data with other parties. And that's where the supply chain risk also, becomes very, very important to manage. But yeah, these are some of my initial thoughts there.
So rightly said. Organizations, the businesses drive, the companies are driven by business. Security is there because the business is there, right? If there's no business, there's no security. And with that, if we see the landscape out there where new organizations, technologies are coming up, we observe that, security can never, and the consultants and the developers can never come up with the idea that, okay, there will be a X product in future, which I have to start thinking of securing right now. So you can't actually think of, securing something before it exists. And that's where the challenge comes, new technology comes and then there is a response from the industry in terms of how to actually tackle this challenge. And that's why threat actors, they're always ahead. And with limited resources and finite resources, and you rightly mentioned, the challenge with known knowns known unknowns and unknown unknowns, as Donald Rumsfeld said that, there are unknown unknowns there, but you can actually capture certain information about, and predictive analysis can actually, with scenario analysis, you can actually think about things which can be out there, which are happening in the industry. And that means we're talking about threat intelligence. With threat intelligence, one of the challenges that there are so many feeds which come in. And Ankit, I'll ask you this question, that, with growing attacks, there's so many regions out there. There is strategic threat intelligence, then there's tactical and operational. And, the teams are overwhelmed with the kind of data. And even when they're talking about integration and, sorting out and prioritizing, that's where a real challenge is happening. So with all that information coming up, how do we need to, respond to that situation?
So I'll again answer the previous question first, because I had some points to contribute to what Beenu was saying. I think the market research companies, like the Gs and the Fs, without properly naming them, have really upped the market for the marketeers, but have really ruined it for the CISOs, CXOs, the managers and all of that, because risk prioritization has always been there. Zero trust has always been there. If you talk about zero trust, segmentation, micro-segmentation, VLAN segmentation, that is basically zero trust, right? But now we're calling it zero trust as a new name. Risk prioritization, how do you prioritize? How do you get to that point where you prioritize without identifying and without spreading the awareness of the fact of differentiating between a risk, a threat, an event, and an incident to start with, right? So I think, sure, but while certain platforms are there that can help you with risk prioritization and your P1's internal naming schemes as well, but I think apart from the risk score that has been assigned to a specific asset, that asset value needs to be determined as well, to say that, okay, I have a SQL database on a server that is a staging server, which is facing the internet. Is that a threat or not? Because it's staging, right? Development on that specific server is still going on. Now, the risk score for that could be probably F, which is in dark red, but the asset value for me personally is kind of zero, right? Because that staging server is empty, right? So I think it comes down to that as well, which is something that not a lot of people are talking about. But personally, it's worked like a charm for me. Coming back to the intelligence side, I think when you tap into the world of the deep, the dark, you will be overwhelmed with information, because often it's the platforms like Cyber, for example, that help us, or rather help us navigate through that entire surface, through keywords, through domains that we feed into the platform, right? And that's really what helps us identify and prioritize what we really need to know through social media brand mentions, for example. In that mentions, you can see categories on impersonation, trademark infringements, etc., etc. But otherwise, had it not been for this, then how do, so the question to the question, right? How do dark web researchers who don't use certain platforms come up with certain information that is ingested into platforms like Cyber, right? There is a way forward. There is a specific, like you rightly said, strategic, tactical, and operational is something that you follow. I follow the same model for IR and intelligence, which is the diamond model, which people from intelligence would be aware of. And that really helps you navigate to the adversary, to the victim, to what's important and what's not. So I think the sum of it is that, basically.
Very rightly said. The frameworks out there actually, they help to have a complete focus, and when you said, the zero trust was out there, so actually with the theme of zero trust network, a more focused approach came in, because now it's, whenever you come up with a theme, it becomes that theme centric. Like people used to say, it's business centric, then they say, oh, it's compliance centric. So whatever you put in the center, the focus starts on that thing to protect that. Some people say it's threat centric. So now people take a threat-centric approach, and with that we already had 2-3 key outcomes in the conversation. One was that security is not equal to compliance. You mentioned that security is not equal to convenience, and then there is that security is not equal to privacy as well. So you walk into a mall and you'll find that there are cameras, right? The cameras for the security purpose, but at the same time, they're impacting your privacy, right? So with that in mind, and as you're protecting the data of the organization, and your title is also your data protection director, how do you see that? There are threats out there. We talked about that external attack surface mostly, and when we talk about the data privacy, it's mostly a lot of focus is done inside a threat. So how does risk profiling and risk scoring help internally in organization to defend against the data privacy threats?
Yeah, I mean that's actually a common issue that we face, and one of the ways that we challenge that, or we actually try to face that issue, is having a more of a consolidated frameworks. There are industry standard frameworks out there, which is like the NIST, ISO, but to help actually assess your risk, there are regulatory standards out there, which is for in the EU, it would be GDPR. In Dubai, there is the DIFC. In Abu Dhabi, there is the ADGM. All these jurisdictions, they have regulatory frameworks. And these regulatory frameworks have really valuable collateral that they are providing. For example, privacy impact assessments. Now, when we actually do privacy impact assessment, whenever for any initiative that there could be, whether it be a new product launch, new way of collecting data, entering a new market, going into a new jurisdiction, these are all initiatives that will have to go through a PIA in our organization. And one of the outcomes of the PIA is evaluating those risks. And when we evaluate those risks, we actually map it to industry standards, which would be the NIST Data Privacy Framework, which then will be eventually also mapped to the security frameworks as well to have a whole 360 view. Security and privacy is definitely overlapping in a lot of ways. But however, organizations do often fail to collaborate on that topic. Security stays as security, privacy stays as privacy. And that a lot of times happen because security will be with information security, and sometimes privacy will sit with legal, which is completely fine. But there needs to be an overlapping of frameworks. There needs to be a mapping of industry standards to jurisdictional and regulatory standards. If your organization is operating in a space that's heavily regulated, whether it be banking or healthcare, oftentimes they will require you to go through a formal risk analysis, and they will also have data privacy, data protection, and security controls to be in place. Those are oftentimes a great middle point to have these different frameworks meet as well. So to summarize, really, is to have your different frameworks mapped into one holistic framework so you can really get a 360 view of the risks associated with it.
Thank you. With this, we are entering into the end game because we have just 9 minutes left almost. So we'll try to sum up the whole discussion. Beenu, so we have understood with the discussion that cyber risk scoring is really important, and actually it can help in understanding your risk profile, understanding the threats and landscape and the exposure out there, and as well as inside exposure. So what do you think have been traditionally the limitations of previous models, approaches, scoring systems, and how the new systems are addressing those? And are you ready for taking the new challenge and knowing more information, more visibility, and prioritizing the resource organization?
Again, that's my opinion, so please don't judge. This is the opinion of Saibal here. But in my opinion, the fundamentals or the foundations are still the same. We're going to keep on coming back with new tools, new tech, and we're going to come up with some fancy way of articulating that, hey, this is how you prioritize it. I think that's just a marketing spin. In my humble opinion, the foundations are still is very similar. We need to first understand what are we protecting, why are we protecting, and what is the value at risk. These are the fundamentals, which we need to really care about. In the past, there have been certain challenges because of the fact that as the organizations were evolving rapidly, especially with the industries which are in the fintech or banking or even manufacturing or utilities, Internet of Things. I mean, those are the new tech that actually created a lot more variance in the understanding of what is out there we have as a company. So let's say if you are a large, airline, for an example, without naming anybody, I mean, it's not just a traditional infrastructure which they have. There's a ton of, sensors, IoT devices, which are currently sitting out there. And unfortunately, those new devices, the new infrastructure is also placing risks to the organization. I think what has changed from the previous era, if I look back like 15 years ago, when I was still younger, I think there's a lot more exciting technology out there for organizations to get a better visibility on what their current landscape looks like, not just in the traditional IT space, but also in the OT, SCADA, or IoT landscape. The second thing is when it comes to the quantitative analysis of your risks, we need to obviously have a better understanding in terms of threat modeling. The threats, which are targeting the SCADA, OT, IoT environments are not exactly the same if you compare them to the traditional infrastructure application. I mean, imagine this part, like if you have a CAN bus protocol running on a large excavator, I mean, the way you do attacks from there is very different than you're doing a SQL injection on a website. So the threat modeling of these new infrastructure or the Gen 2 and Gen 3 infrastructure becomes very, very, very critical. And that has a direct influence on how you create this, the scoring models or creating new standard or trying to standardize it. And that's an iterative process, in my opinion. There's no tech out there at the moment. Maybe AI could do a better job, especially with the democratization of AI along with the RAG. We as Cyber, we use a ton of RAG in our customer implementation in the sense on how we can create more context, generate more insights. And they are literally on the leash at the moment. I mean, if you have seen how OpenAI have been able to transform the world today, I think it's a miracle, if I have to call it at least. And I think some of these new tech, if you position them with the older solutions or deployment, I think the results can be remarkable. So in my humble opinion, this is not a topic about whether these new large language models or these new AI models are smart enough. They actually are brilliant. I think it's all about giving them the right structure and framework with the right data. And these systems can be a lot more powerful in terms of generating the insights. So just to summarize what I said, the foundations are now changing. It's the way we are collecting and processing them in a framework which is a lot more transparent between a buyer and a seller as a product and a CISO, and then being able to do it's an iterative approach to make them better. That's the general, that's the way I think it's probably the best way forward.
Thank you. Suhaila, any final views?
I would like to add to how AI and intelligence and machine learning add value to our industry here. So in city of Dubai here, we have developed many algorithms to automate the services, systems, and so on. They were developed by UAE national team at Dubai Electronic Security Center to automate risk scoring, to encourage critical national infrastructure to compete. Therefore, an initiative was created called Dubai Cyber Index, and it has multiple pillars such as Mirgab, TERS, RISAM, and so on. For example, RISAM, it detects any malicious website, and it differentiates the malicious website from the legit one. TERS, for example, test government organization website and check for any vulnerabilities. And based on that, they send reports to a corresponding organization. There are also many others algorithms were developed. You can check for more details on Dubai Electronic Security Center, which is www.dubaiec.com. desc.gov.ae. There is also a new platform I would like to address. It was launched in JISEC. It's called ASAS, used by auditors to automate the audit and enhance future audit operations, to reduce risk and enable a safer digital future as well. So using AI and machine learning technologies will help in reducing human bias, and it will enable us using diverse data from different sources such as IoT devices, data behavior and social media, transaction data, etc. This will also help in proactive risk assessment for a timely decision making as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, panelists. It was a wonderful talk. I think we learned a lot with different sorts of ideas, background experiences, and definitely, as Suhaila mentioned, the government of UAE is doing an outstanding job, second to none, actually. This is the region where it's a hub of collaboration, creativity, innovation, and advancement. And I think the steps are in the right direction. And I would like to thank the sponsors here, Saibal and the other sponsors, for arranging this wonderful, event, the conference, for inviting all of us here to present our ideas, exchange thoughts with you guys, with the wonderful audience here. Thank you so much. And if there are any questions from the audience, we'd love to hear. Yeah. Can you share the mic with the audience, please?
Thank you for a very insightful panel talk. My name is Jordan Savidis. I'm a global CISO advisor with 28 years experience both from Europe and the GCC. And I would like to also give you my own personal opinion based on my experiences. What you are saying is totally right. The cyber threat landscape is rising exponentially every day. And the cyber, as well as the associated cyber attack vectors and the cyber attack techniques. However, the reason the cyber attacks are on the rise is mostly because companies, even to this day, they don't exercise basic cybersecurity hygiene. Companies are still negligent. I can safely tell you from my experience, there's not a single data breach or security incident globally that couldn't have been prevented with the technologies we have at our hands. The question is, are we willing to invest in these technologies? Are we willing to embrace them? Like the gentleman said, do we have board support to do it? Or you said, oh, we never got hacked. Why invest more? That's security through obscurity, because the fight never ends. The battle never ends. Cybersecurity doesn't make you money. It's a cost center. However, it will save you millions, because one data breach can result to huge financial losses. But like another gentleman said, financial losses you can recover from, right? What about reputational losses? They can be reversible, especially for a bank. We built our online banking trust, customer trust, for 10 years now, right? You can lose it in one day, and then you're out of business. Look what happened to Equifax, the credit agency in the US in 2016. They had an Apache server not patched, and the vulnerability was critical. When hell broke loose and the incident went live, they said, hey, you know what? It was labor intensive to patch the Apache server. No excuse whatsoever. No excuse whatsoever. Anyway, what I'm trying to say here is that we need to have solid strategies. We need to know where to invest. The predict, prevent, detect, respond, adaptive security architecture by Gartner, although it was released in 2016, is still very much alive. Okay? We need to embrace those predictive, preventive, detective, and responsive controls and invest in them, because I insist, we can at least, if we cannot prevent the attack, we will definitely detect it. Because cyber AI especially is able to detect the abnormal activity. And you all know, because you're cybersecurity experts, that if we get compromised in our internal corporate network with an advanced persistent threat or zero-day vulnerability that has no pattern or rules or signatures, it will definitely create abnormal activity. Cyber AI XDR will most definitely detect it. User behavior monitoring. So we have the systems. So yeah, we need to be clear in our strategy and our investment. But yeah, the battle never ends and things are going to get worse. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Really, I would say this was a complimentary dessert for us. You know, honestly, I mean, you exchanged some really wonderful thoughts and, added sugar. I believe, we have, a lot of work to do, and we have said a lot of things, a lot of, commitments at our end. And I think, as you rightly said, there needs to be a tone from the top in organizations. With that, I'll, just conclude the session. Thank you so much to the wonderful audience, and lots of, applause for the panelists here, please.